it going, everyone? Great to be here this morning. It's fun to be back in conferences and be around people. My name's Tyler Hogge. I lead the product and risk teams at a local company named Divvy, and I'm pretty excited to be here and share a couple of lessons and mistakes and learnings that we have as we grow Divvy's product team from 4 people about 2.5 years ago to closer to 35 people today. I kind of call this Divvy's product playbook, but there's a big emphasis on how we can better align ourselves with the revenue organizations at your companies. And I hope that there's some practical learnings that we've had over the past couple of years that are relevant to everybody's company, whether it's B2B or B2C. But first, I want to tell you a quick story. I joined Divvy 2.5 years ago from a company in the Bay Area named Wealthfront, and was not looking to leave the Bay Area. Loved it out there, absolutely loved the product and the company, and maybe planned to spend my career in the Bay Area, home prices notwithstanding. And this guy, Blake Murray, reaches out to me over LinkedIn talking about this rocket ship named Divvy in Utah. And I will admit that I had 2 biases that I think were very naive and actually proved to be incorrect that caused me to be a little skeptical of Blake's initial outreach. And the first bias was that product teams, or I guess more generally tech companies in Utah, are so sales-led at the expense of being engineering or product-led. And by the way, I do not mean that as a negative towards revenue. My actual background is in building sales teams. Wealthfront was my first role in product, had never done it before. And so I understand and really do value and appreciate and respect the profession of sales and revenue. But I had learned that as a salesperson, I wanted to work for a product and engineering-led organization. And I wasn't sure if Utah had the DNA that would allow for that. And the second concern was, well, these entrepreneurs in Utah, I was really drinking the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid of build these massive generational companies that could be worth several $billion, and is Utah really trying to do that? And in retrospect, I was completely wrong on both. And over the last couple of years, it's been really fun to see the massive successes that are coming out of the Utah tech ecosystem. I'm very bullish and very excited that Utah will be one of the top 3 tech epicenters over the next decade. So that second concern, gone. First concern actually is completely changing too, and this conference is evidence of that. So I think we should give a quick round of applause for the front folks for putting this together. Because you're seeing this change, that we're a design-led, an engineering-led, and a product-led tech ecosystem. And again, that is not at the expense of anyone that's not in those functions. It's just the right way to build a tech company. And that's been the case at Divvy, although we've screwed up a bunch along the way. There's been 4 or 5 things that I want to share with you today that I think will be applicable. And this comes from a bunch of intentionally inflammatory tweets that I sent out about 1.5 years ago that First Round Review thought was interesting and decided to write an article about. So if you're curious, this is in the First Round Review. But this is a distillation of the lessons that I tweeted out that night on a random evening after a rough day of work. The 5 things I want to cover. What's the proper role of a product org? What's the right framing of a PM within that org? How should the product org be organized? How should the product org be measured? And what's the right operating cadence ongoing? So you'll see a lot of this is meant for product leaders, but every PM, I hope, and every designer, frankly, and every engineer could glean something from this. And we have failed in a lot of these things, and I do not mean to convey that Divvy has done expertly, but through these failures, I think a lot of these lessons have borne to be true. So the first premise that I want to set forth, what is the right role of a product organization or a tech company more generally? It's to be product-led. And product-led, I think, could simplify to you want to build your business on the back of a phenomenal product. And you want the go-to-market functions to be fulfilling demand that your product generates because it's just so damn good. As opposed to the more brute-force model of we won't invest quite as much into product or design, but we'll win through a brute-force model of sales and go-to-market. That's not the way to win, I think, in today's markets. I think the idea of if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product you shipped too late made a whole lot of sense 15 years ago when experiences were well below the standard that we have today. And today, I think consumers and business users require experiences that meet a much higher bar. And so being product-led allows you to compete in the marketplace. So that's kind of the first premise. And we just check that out of the way, that I think every tech company should be product-led. I do not mean the individual product leader should be leading the company. I mean the strategy should be around building a great product and then layering on distribution because of that great product. And counterintuitively, most companies actually don't win because of their product in the long term. I think it's actually ends up being because of distribution. But a great product is a necessary but insufficient condition to doing that. So in a product-led org, what's the right framing for the product management role? And this is where it might get a little more controversial, and I think there's a lot of nuance here. But if you can think of a spectrum, and let's go to two extremes real quick. On one hand, you have a product manager as a project manager who manages a Scrum team and Jira tasks. And on the other hand, you have this very extreme statement of the PM is the CEO of the product. And I think there are problems with both ends, but if you ask me to pick which one is the right framing through which to view the product management role, it is definitely the one on the right. So I think it's a terrible metaphor for a couple of reasons, the CEO metaphor. No one's reporting to you. You are not the iron fist. But I do think it is a great metaphor for a few other reasons, and that is that you have to get the stakeholders and you have to put the customer first, and you have to lead a diverse group of teammates that maybe have differing perspectives, and you should be accountable to outcomes, which is one we'll talk about in just a second. So I lean more to the right, and I even tweak it a little bit to say that maybe a GM as a product manager as opposed to a CEO, someone who's tying themselves to specific outcomes and ownership. And this is perhaps from my experience in revenue, I have this almost reverence for someone in revenue who signs up and says, I'll own that number. And I know that number's gonna go up next month, but I'm gonna sign my name next to that number and I'm gonna call it a quota. And I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And like I said, I have a reverence or a respect for people in revenue who say, I'm gonna do that. And I thought, well, gosh, can we do that in product and design and engineering? Can't we sign up for some stuff too? And maybe quotas is the word that engineers at Divvy maybe will hate me to use, but like, can't we own some outcomes and let's just say that that's the replacement for quotas? And can we make the PM the directly responsible individual for some of these outcomes and start to judge the product org and engineering org and design org overall against these outcomes? And I like this framing because these are really relevant and do kind of coincide with what your role would be as a CEO. But there's a bunch of words of caution. If you take from this that Tyler's preaching a gospel of PM as the king or queen, that is not what I'm saying. In fact, I strongly agree with Bill Campbell's famous quote, the $1 trillion coach, of the most important ingredient in every successful technology company is the empowered engineer. Totally agree with that statement. And a great product lead is going to learn pretty quick that unless I get the engineer and the designer bought in on outcomes, unless I'm involving them in discovery, unless they are co-creating this area of the product with me, I'm dead on arrival. And so this is not a PM rules with an iron fist framework. It is a PM is the directly responsible individual over the outcomes of an area, and she must learn very quickly that unless the engineer and the designer feels ownership over that, she will fail very quickly as well. So that's the word of caution. This is not a PM monarchy. So if we agree with those first two premises, that an organization should be product-led, and a PM should be more like a GM than a taskmaster or a project manager, how do you go about organizing teams? And then I'll get into how you align with revenue in just a second. So we start at the top, and I want to tell a second story here. It's an apocryphal story, meaning we don't know if it's true, but JFK showed up to NASA's headquarters the week after he announced the race to the moon in order to meet the personnel and the key leaders who were going to be sending an American to the moon. And he walks up to a man who appeared to be a janitor who was mopping the floors. And he said, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy, the President of the United States. What do you do for NASA?" And the man replies, "Well, sir, I'm sending a man to the moon." Now, again, it's an apocryphal story, but I think it teaches a great lesson that from everybody within NASA, from the president to the janitor, they understood what the mission was. It's to send a man to the moon. And so I think the right way to organize a product team is you have to start with the mission and the vision of the company. And so I have to get aligned with Blake Murray, our CEO. Blake's job and his goal, what do you want to accomplish, Blake? Why does Divvy exist? And it turns out Divvy exists to serve small businesses with the capital they need and the software they need to thrive. Okay, well that's our company mission. How does the product enable that? And then you start to get into product strategy. And product strategy and corporate strategy, if there's a Venn diagram, it's not completely overlapping to one circle, but it's pretty close. And the more you can align those two, the better. So that kind of vision or mission translates down into a couple of initiatives that you have to accomplish over a given time frame. Call it a strategic initiative or 2 or 3. And then you have to align your teams against those initiatives. And we do it at Divvy. We have 14 areas, 14 squads, that at that point it became quite a few. We decided to actually aggregate those into 4 pillars, kind of like super areas, 4 pillar leads with directors of product who lead those 4 pillars. And then the areas take on projects that lead to these initiatives, and of course those projects can be broken down to the JIRA tasks. And you should be able to see, an engineer should be able to know that the JIRA task that they're working on, how it flows all the way up to the mission and vision of the company. And if you've done things well, you should be able to walk up to the janitor and they know how their work of mopping the floor is leading a man to the moon. And again, lots of fail points here, but I do know that this is the right way to do it. So then after you've got alignment along the vision all the way down to the JIRA task, we decided, and this is with the help of one of the best leaders at Divvy, his name's Jacob Graff, who led product before I joined and was kind enough to allow me to step in. And now I work most closely with him, probably with the product org, along with a few other leaders, Gentry, Stacia, Logan, our design leader, Chris. We sat down early on and said, well, what are our product principles? What are the things that we're going to use in order to manage Divvy's product team? And I have all 7 of them up here. The first 2 are the 2 that I just feel like I repeat nonstop, that in the quality, speed, scope conversation, quality is our North Star. Nothing trades off against it. Speed is our second star. And the drum that I beat incessantly is that these 2 things are not always in conflict with each other. In fact, more often than not, I believe they feed off of each other. And the higher quality you want, the quicker you want to go so that you can get something to the market so that quality increases. And the more quality you have, the more faster you want to go. And it's actually a feedback loop instead of a trade-off. And I would challenge you and your teams to never fall into the trap of that quality is always at the expense of speed or vice versa. And so my point here is that to decide your product principles is one of the most important things you can do in a product org. And these are ours. You should have your own, but I do think quality should probably be your North Star. All right, so you got product principles, you've got alignment on the strategy. Well, how actually did you divide it up? I talked about 14 areas, and so the analogy I'll use here is it's almost as though your product is a cul-de-sac, an HOA. And in order for that whole cul-de-sac to be a beautiful part of the ecosystem, every individual plot of land needs to take care of their plot of land. Otherwise, the whole cul-de-sac starts to go down. And so you divide up the product into mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive pieces of land that we call areas that are led by a squad. And that squad has a quartet of a PM, a designer, an engineer, and a product marketer. Very X's and O's stuff that probably all of you do. But there's another caution here that, and if you're reading into this quite a bit, you're probably picking up on the dynamic of, well, Tyler, you're making these PMs as GMs and you're giving them a plot of land that they get to own with their teams. Won't that inevitably lead to people micro-optimizing for their plot of land instead of the whole cul-de-sac? Because the whole cul-de-sac is the goal, not the plot of land. The whole cul-de-sac has to be great, and my job is to make the whole cul-de-sac great. And you're right, there are trade-offs there, and the more you push for people to have a great plot of land, the more they might actually myopically focus on their acre when if they better planned with someone across the street, we could build a better overall cul-de-sac. And so we do a couple of things to fix that. We have product operations, again, started by Jacob Graff, who is trying to ensure that what we ship to customers feels like a seamless and coherent experience, that it doesn't feel like there's boundary lines around each acre. And actually, if you really drill down, because I've often asked, and this is actually a funny story. So in the middle of COVID, I spoke with the head of product at Airbnb about how they were thinking about areas. And he said, Tyler, Brian Chesky stood up and he said, we're in war. We're trying to survive. All areas are disbanded. We have one area, and it's called Airbnb. And we have one set of objectives, and your job is to align against those objectives. That's it. No more area boundaries. And I thought, well, actually, isn't that the best way to run regardless? And in essence, the answer is yes, with one caveat, that area ownership provides you clarity on who should handle bugs and issues that pop up. Like everyone should feel like that square inch of the cul-de-sac is owned, and an area provides that. But if you lean too far into this, you end up micro-optimizing at the lot level instead of the cul-de-sac level. So that's another learning we've had there and still continue to try to improve. And this is kind of the heart of the message today, that in order to really move the needle, you have to align well with revenue. You have to be tied with your counterparts. And again, I'm biased because of my background coming from revenue, but I tend to believe that product folks over-intellectualize product sometimes, when really it boils down to, will the customer buy this? And you know who has a good sense of will the customer buy it? It's often the revenue folks. And it's not always that simple, and I do understand the principle of customers don't know what they want till a great product person thinks of it. I agree with that, but I think those are, that can coexist with the idea of tightly aligned with revenue. So what do I mean by that? Start with the leaders. Are you aligned with the head of revenue? Is a PM aligned with the sales leadership? Then align on outcomes. And this is what caught First Round's eye when I was tweeting that night, because I made the statement that PMs should own numbers and potentially sign up for numbers like a revenue number. And that underlying outcomes of a software business are kind of all the same across. It's like sign customers up cost effectively, ramp them, get them to generate revenue. In the case of Divvy, it's when they spend on their credit card, retain them forever. And like these outcomes are pretty consistent, so shouldn't we divvy up these outcomes and give them to product people and let them own them? And I think the answer is yes. We set up things called empathy hours where PMs are sitting with our support team and our sales teams and being able to talk to customers with that salesperson or with that support person drives a bunch of empathy for both roles as well as insight as to how to prioritize a roadmap. PMs should be on the road with sales reps, meeting with customers as much as they can. I'm trying to talk to 2 customers every week at least. I'm on the road with our head of revenue, Sterling, multiple times a month in order to close larger deals. And the last one is one I'll share with you, is create a customer-facing roadmap. This is something we've done pretty recently that's off to a really good start, I would say. And what it's done is it takes our revenue folks from the defensive to the offensive. They can have proactive conversations with customers about the roadmap instead of fearing that customers will bring up the roadmap, which is the default state for people in revenue or customer success. Why not turn your roadmap into a weapon? And if it's not a weapon, then what's wrong? You're doing something wrong. And so we've created a customer-facing roadmap. I'll show you what that looks like. This is literally our customer-facing roadmap as of this morning. And it's a simple framework. What's new? What's now? What's next? So really quickly, you can walk a customer through what's new. What have we shipped recently? And that changes the tone of a conversation of a quarterly business review to the customer's like, you know, sometimes it feels like you're not shipping what I want, but you're showing me this evidence that, yeah, you're doing a good job. And 3 of those things are things that I wanted before, ideally. And, 10 of them aren't, but at least I know you're shipping something. Nice job, Divvy. And we walk them through all the things we're doing month by month by month, and they get excited about that. And then we move to what's now. And we talk about, here's the 6 initiatives. And by the way, our bookkeeper role MVP shipped yesterday. So CJ, if you're watching, Nice job on that one. So we're going to move that to green. And there's 5 other projects. Blake McClary shipped our ACH for reimbursements product with his team like a couple weeks ago. So it's fun to be able to tell customers what's coming and give them a general sense of timeline. And yes, I do think you should put timeline on here and want to get even more granular on when we're doing these things instead of 2-month increments. And then you move to the future-facing stuff. What's next? And I do put the typical caveats of like, hey, this is subject to change. No engineer is working on this now, Mr. Customer. And so when that's not the case, you should not rely on it. But I do have high confidence that we will have engineers working on this next. And so here are those things. And customers love this. They just want to know that what you're doing, and if it's not what they wanted, what you're doing instead of that. And to be transparent about the trade-offs that you're facing. And when you lay out the trade-offs, they tend to be more appreciative of the trade-offs once you lay those out to them. And so the customer-facing roadmap has been one of the keys for us to align with revenue. All right, the 4th of the 5 points I'll share is how should a product org and PMs be measured? And I did not bury the lead here. I think it's by outcomes. And so every one of our squads has outcomes. These are actually a little out of date at this point, and we're going through a revision process right now to simplify these. But we want every squad to feel ownership over the outcomes. And when things are good, I'll give you the patterns of something you're looking for. You're looking for one of your eng leads to say, Tyler, I just refreshed the dashboard and we're close to this outcome. An engineer who's bought into the outcome is a pattern that you're looking for. A designer who is designing his or her prototypes against what will deliver the outcome is what you're looking for. Because any idiot can ship software, but does it generate the outcomes that we want for the business? And so you align on outcomes. And that's, I think, where the alignment with revenue becomes pretty key, because it turns out there's only so many outcomes that a business needs to provide, and those happen to be owned solely by revenue unless you step in as product leaders or design leaders and say, I want to own them with you. The last kind of inside baseball that I'll share is something we call PMOPS. These are product management operating principles. PMOPS are 5 things that we use as our rubric for what we expect out of product managers. And our director of design, Chris Higley, has PDOPS, product design operating principles. And Julie, our head of marketing, has PMOPS, product marketing operating principles. And I, as the head of product, have PLOPS, product leadership operating principles. It's the rubric. This is how we do things at Divvy. And these are different from our product principles, and you might be thinking, well, you got principles everywhere, so you're not going to follow them, but we try really hard for that not to be the case. These PMOPS, there's 5 of them. Well, what does a great product manager do? She drives outcomes for the business. She ships delightful products to our customers. She earns and maintains the trust and admiration of her peers. She perfects her written and verbal communication, and she masters what we call the PM fundamentals. And every one of these PMOPs has like 5 or 6 attributes underneath them to kind of flesh out what it is that we mean by these PMOPs. And this, aligning on how you operate and setting the standard does 2 or 3 things for you very clearly. It helps you in recruiting. It's your rubric for, will this person score well on our PMOPs? If no, what are we doing? It helps you in managing and evaluating performance. Is this PM doing well against our PMOPs? And it gives alignment, again, back to, you'll see outcomes is the #1 PMOP. What are my outcomes and how am I driving those? So I would suggest that the whole point here is to kind of lay out what it means to be excellent in the role, and then your org can get, the third thing it does is it allows you to put together a training program that makes these PMOPs easily understood. Like, for example, master the PM fundamentals. One of those is how to run a meeting. And so we'll give a training on how to run a meeting. And another one might be how to communicate a complex topic over slides. And so we give a training on the SCQA pyramid principle on how to communicate well. And all of these things lead into what it means to be a good product manager at Divvy. And the last point here I'll make is, what is the right operating cadence? There's a bunch of meetings that we've tried. Some of these are actually old and we've disbanded. But the one to focus on and the crux of it all is the product review. And every one of those squads does a product review every 2 weeks. We've since kind of moved to more pillar reviews, so multiple squads are presenting in the same pillar review every 2 weeks. And to continue with the CEO or GM metaphor, this is the board meeting. This is where you get to show progress, and where it serves two functions. It's good for the team. It acts as a forcing function to show progress every 2 weeks against your vision and your outcomes. And it's great for the stakeholders, AKA the board in this sense, to understand how the teams are doing and whether or not they're making the right progress, and to inform the roadmap. And it's a great way, it's a mini board meeting, and we've found a lot of success in these. And in the right case, you're actually collaborating as leaders and individual contributors on how to deliver outcomes for the business while delighting customers along the way. And doing both of those is the key challenge of product management, I think. And so again, we give a training, 10 Commandments of Perfect Product Reviews. This is one of the PMOPS, how to run a great product review. And if you're curious, just like reach out to me after. I'm happy to share what these 10 commandments are of how to make product reviews great. So, to summarize, I think the product playbook, let's answer it. What's the proper role of a product org? Let's be product-led. What's the right framing? PM is the GM, but beware. How should the product org be organized? In mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive areas with product principles, connected to the company strategy, and tightly aligned with revenue, and there's specific ways to do that. How should the product org be measured? Against outcomes and PMOPS. And one of those PMOPS happens to be generating outcomes. And what is the right operating cadence? Product reviews ends up being the crux, and you build around that. That's it. That's all I've got for you today. If you have questions for me, I would be more than happy to talk to anyone more about the failures, because there's many at Divvy, many things we've screwed up, and I kind of chuckle because our revenue leadership, if they were here right now, would be like, man, a lot of the times I wish you guys did better on this stuff. And I do too. Some of this is aspirational, but when we do these things, things go much smoother. So reach out to me if you have questions, and would love to help anybody out as you're kind of thinking through your own playbook. Thanks a lot.
Oh, that was wonderful. Okay, let's have some questions. Thank you, Tyler. Okay, we've had a few questions here. You ready for this?
Yep.
All right. So Kevin says, relating to empowering teams and not being a monarch PM, how do you help engineers and teams to feel empowered and not come back to the PM for final sign-off on most decisions?
Yeah, I think, this is pretty sound vanilla advice, but engineers do best, in my experience, when you just kind of marry them to the problem, teach them about the problem. If you're getting beat in the market by a competitor, by the way, Divvy's in a very competitive marketplace, and some of our competitors have things that we don't have, instead of kind of like beating the competitive drum, show the problem. It's like, these guys have something that we don't have, and our customers are suffering as a result. And great engineers' instinct is to like, okay, well, how do I solve that problem? And then they get buy-in on the problem, which means they'll automatically be more involved in the solution. The anti-pattern would be like, you don't involve them in the problem, you tell them what the solution should be, and then they go deliver it. Less buy-in, less urgency to solve it the right way. Pretty standard stuff.
For everybody's context, can you tell them what a DRI is?
Yeah, sorry, directly responsible individual. It's just like the crude saying would be the one throat to choke, the person who's in charge.
We don't choke throats.
We don't, yeah.
Tyler.
We're in Happy Valley here, right?
Yeah, right. So if you're using a PM, are you also using product owner for Jira, Scrum tasks?
We do not have anything called a product owner, no. And every squad kind of decides who the right person is to task manage a lot of this stuff. And I laid out that framework, the spectrum on product, Scrum owner to PM as a CEO. It actually turns out you have to do a lot of the stuff on the left. It's a subset of this. It's not like instead of, so I guess that spectrum's probably bad, but it's a subset. You have to do all the project management, or at least some of it, or decide who to do it, but it doesn't stop there, is the point.
Okay, regarding the customer roadmap, how do you decide the right level of granularity to share in a customer-facing roadmap?
Yeah, so the principle is, would a customer be excited to see that on a slide? If yes, put it on there. That's the goal. The outcome is to generate good customer conversations. And so it is biased more towards slightly larger and customer-facing features in lieu of, say, internal tech debt, smaller projects that a customer wouldn't care about. It's like, oh, yeah, I like that. That's the principle, and then there's judgment involved.
Okay. Who's responsible for defining the PDOPs?
The PDOPs. So if it's design, if you're saying PDOPs, that was Chris Higley. Chris Higley, our head of design, decided what the PDOPs should be, taking cues from the PMOPS, product management ones. But Chris and I worked together on those, and ultimately it's kind of his team, so he decided.
Aren't all acronyms supposed to be 3 letters?
Yeah, we're breaking the mold, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Do you find that these principles change at all based on the size of the product org?
In 2.5 years at Divvy, we have removed a couple product principles or switched them out, but the PDOPs have, I think, remained the same. We've refined, but I don't think we've added new ones. So just to give you a sense for how often we've changed them.
Okay. How can PMs act as GMs when others, including GMs, are also acting as GMs?
Yeah, great question. So when I first came to Divvy, we had the GM model. Like there was literally a GM who was not a product manager. And so there was a GM and a PM, and I hated it. And so I tried to change that pretty quick. And maybe other people have ways to make that work. I just couldn't make it work. I wanted the PM to be the GM, and so we got rid of the GM role and made the PM more of a GM role. By the way, I should caveat, when you hear GM, you often think of someone who owns the P&L. That's not the strict definition of what I mean here. I just mean the idea that you should own an outcome. That's what I mean by GM. And so my advice to someone who is trying to run the GM as well as PM is don't, or figure out ways to do it that I couldn't and let me know how you did it.
I love that. What challenges have you found with making Divvy a product-led company?
I think as a product person, you're just like in revenue actually, you're only as good as your last month. And product market fit can slip and be strong, and your credibility with the rest of the organization can slip and be strong. And so I think the big challenge to being a product-led org is kind of earning the right to be great. You have to re-earn that every 2 weeks, it feels like. And it's really easy to lose credibility with folks if you say you're going to do something and don't do it. If your do-say ratio is low, it's really easy to lose credibility there. And so I think the best way to do it is to say what you're going to do and then go do it as a product team and improve that do-say ratio as much as you can.
So from when you started at Divvy and started implementing all of this within the organization, how long do you feel like it took to really set in as the standard? And
in some sense, there's 2 answers. In some sense, we're still doing it. We're still trying to incorporate it. We're still fine-tuning the process of creating outcomes and getting clarity on that, and we're not great at it yet. But as far as getting it up and running, it just took a couple months, and you sell this program to the team, and they can decide if they want to be a part of it or not. And fortunately, I don't think anyone opted out. I think people like this idea. If you hire the right people, they want to own stuff. That's all this is.
Great. Well, let's give Tyler another round of applause. Thank you, everyone.